Kelli, it's so great to have you joining me on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
You've got a really amazing story. A difficult one, a tragic one, and yet I'm really encouraged. When I hear about and see how you're stewarding that story and what you're doing to help other people in it. But I'd love for people just to kind of hear about where you are right now. What's your family like? What's your just to kind of give some present day context. Where do you live? What do you do? Mm-hmm. And then we'll dive back into how you got here because all of us, we're sitting in a place doing what we're doing, probably not because we asked for it, but we're just trying to figure out how to steward what God's put in front of us. And I see that in your life. And so I'd love for you to tell us now, where are you at? What are you doing right now? And then we'll dive back into your story.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's humbling to be here and to think that my story can have an impact like it has. So today I'm sitting here in my home office in Overland Park, Kansas City.
Okay.
And I've been here for almost 7 years. And I've got my 5 kids all went back to school yesterday. So it's very, very quiet.
It's a quiet house now.
It's the quietest it's been in months and a little weird. But I am, my husband is Mike Goodnow, and I have 4, he has 1. We have blended our family in the last couple of years. And so our kids are 18, 15, 13, 10, and 9.
Wow.
Just had a birthday, so I have to think about that. There's a lot of them. Yeah, so it's not normally this quiet.
I have 3 and I can't even remember their ages. I'm like,
right? Birthdays, you want birthday? That's too many numbers. Yeah, they're amazing. They're 3rd grade up to senior, and there's a lot going on here. Lots of activities, lots of driving. But
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. What's crazy is I'm confident that you've already thought about this, but it occurred to me as I just kind of looked at your last name and, your husband now, you've taken his last name Goodnow.
Right.
And what a powerful statement that is, right?
Only God
Goodnow.
can write this story.
Wow.
I mean, the fact that I get to say I'm good now, it's, we joke about it, but at the same time, you just kind of go, really, Lord?
Yeah.
So it's
those little details, that never escapes him. And I'm like, man, I hope everybody, whatever their pain story, tragedy, trauma, I think those are breadcrumbs that the Lord leaves in our stories to say, hey, I'm here, I'm working in this story. And I just want you to be aware of that. And I hope that we don't miss that in each one of our stories, And there's a time, Kelli, where you would not have said that your life is good now. Right. And I'd love for you to share with us kind of whatever you would deem as like the beginning of that story. Talk to us about that and we'll spend some time just unpacking it.
Yeah. So, gosh, where do I start? At the beginning, I grew up in Texas. So here I am in Kansas. I grew up in Texas, went to college at Texas A&M. My parents were in ministry with the Navigators. So I grew up a ministry kid and in the church and met Shawn Campbell in college. And actually, it occurs to me I should tell the name story since we're talking about the name. But when I met Shawn, his last name was not Campbell. And we started dating. We had a very fast whirlwind relationship. We met and we just knew. And he was contracting with the Marine Corps at the time. And so a long story short, we knew we were going to get married. And that's when he kind of looked at his name and went, wow, what do I do? He had one name on his birth certificate. He had another name on his school ID or Social Security or somewhere because it was a stepfather's name. And but really, he had never had a father in his life, ever. And so, it became a really big deal to him. Like, I'm going to start a family. And everybody called him by one name, but that wasn't his legal name. So we would have to become this other, it was just this sudden, wow, this is actually really complicated. And I remember the day it was like a light bulb. You could see the light bulb go off and he just kind of went, I know what I'm going to do. And, he had developed a relationship with a man through church that had become a father to him. He had become his mentor. They met together. He had welcomed him, into the family. Oh gosh, and And just, he had become his dad, And in that moment, Shawn realized that if anybody is my dad, it's him. And so he was going to be the one to marry us. And so we called him up and said, hey, we really need to talk to you tomorrow. Completely scared the tar out of him. He was like, oh no, they're breaking up. Something's wrong. What's going on? But he wouldn't tell him on the phone. Yeah. So the next day we went to this man, Don Campbell, and Shawn explained and said, I'd really like to change my name to Campbell. And of course there were tears, and it's a boy parties, and, we went to court together, and he changed his name legally. So he was 25 years old. But really the Campbells adopted him into their family. And so then we started our family as the Campbells. And so even more, like you said, the layers upon layers to have this name now, Good Now, is just another way of God saying names are important,
They are. Wow.
And, it's crazy because I didn't really even think about coming into this today talking about that story, but such a big part of our story.
Well, yeah, names are important because they're part of they are part of our story. They give us a lot of clues and insights into our story so often. And you look in Scripture, right? You see how vital names are. How many times did God change somebody's name because what they used to be known for, he wants to make them known as something that's more redemptive, and it's just such a powerful thread, and it's cool to see that that's part of the thread of your story as well.
And it gives a picture of who Shawn was as someone who would choose that, who stopped and thought, I'm starting a family, I want a foundation, and what's that going to be, and he chose it, and then the Campbells chose him in return, and they're still family. And so it's just beautiful. But so, going back, we got married, we became the Campbells, and graduated from college, and we were off on a military adventure. So Shawn he became a CH-53 helicopter pilot with the Marine Corps. And over the next 15 years, we moved around the country, and he deployed several times. And we had 4 kids in the midst of that. And miraculously, he was home for every birth. So we had Tristan, Kenna, Kate, and Donovan. And Donovan was 1 year old when we were stationed in Hawaii. So we moved to Oahu. It was kind of the dream duty station. We were so excited to get out there. It's beautiful and everything we hoped. We loved it. We lived in a little cinder block house on the beach that did not have AC and was miserably hot, but we could hear the ocean, and so there was always relief. And it was beautiful. It was paradise. And we were there for a year and a half, about 15, 18 months. And then January of 2016, Shawn went to work. He had a nighttime training flight scheduled. So he left for work that day and expected to be home around 2 a.m. But instead, I was woken up that night, about 4 o'clock the next morning, by a phone call from my dad here in Kansas City. My parents had moved here by then. And he was calling because 5-6 hour time difference, there was national news breaking that 2 helicopters had gone down in Hawaii. And, of course, we're all still asleep. And so, and in that moment, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm woken up. I'm thinking it's Shawn, but it's not. Where is he? Just that confusion of being brought out of your sleep. And I just remember him asking me if he was home and saying, I'm seeing this news. And so I knew in that second. And I reached over and, I remember putting my hand on his pillow. And I knew it was him. There was only one squadron. He was flying. I knew it was 2 helicopters. And so it's like, I knew this is happening, but you don't know what's happening. And it's so confusing. And so I remember hanging up with my dad and saying, I'm going to call the squadron. And of course, phones weren't answered. There was, phones had been confiscated. And turns out the helicopters had collided just before midnight, the night before, over the ocean. And there was a massive search underway. And of course, because there were 12 Marines involved, they're trying to scramble teams and people to get out to all the families to bring them the news. So unfortunately, that happens. It takes them time to do that, but it takes 5 minutes for it to hit the news. So I had several hours that morning of trying to make phone calls, just confusion. Sometimes I look back and I think, why didn't I just jump in the car and drive to the base 5 minutes down the road? But I think I just thought, surely somebody is going to answer. Surely somebody is going to come here. He's going to come home. Like, and it was like time just stopped.
Yeah.
And so, I remember getting up and it's still dark and making calls. At some point, my kids started to trickle in because they could hear me. And sun rose. I remember sitting outside in my front walkway on the phone, trying to be on the phone and watching the sunrise. And it was about that time I finally reached one of my friends, and she was in her car on the way over when I saw the officers. I saw them walking towards our gate. And I saw my daughter, she was 6 years old. She ran towards the gate because she saw uniforms. And I think she thought Daddy's home. And she let them in. And when I saw, so I knew in that moment, it's like, what's happening, but you cannot process. And I saw one of them was Shawn's closest friend from the squadron. And I just ran to him and I just wanted to hear it from him and not these strangers. There were two other men with him I'd never seen, and all in uniform. And I just said, just tell me. And we went in the door, and he said, we don't know. That was what he said. And I can still picture it. And I just thought, but we do, or we don't. Like, really, what's happening? And they had to read an official report that there had been a collision, search and rescues underway. We don't know, basically. And almost in that day, I remember thinking, kind of being angry, like, we do know. Why are we pretending that this didn't happen? Why are we pretending we're going to find them? And just knowing the impact of the collision, knowing what had been heard and the explosion and the fireball. And I just knew. But here we were having to say, well, we don't know, and maybe they'll be found. And it felt like this kind of false hope I was giving my children. And I realize now, though, that God used that time to give us time to prepare us. And because we were so far away, there was a 5-day search. And in that time, I can't even tell you how many friends and family flew across oceans just to show up. And I realize now, in that moment when I was alone with my kids, I didn't have to tell them. 5 days later, they were all sitting in someone's lap.
Wow.
And when the news came and they finally said, they'd been declared dead, we were surrounded and protected. And we had that week of community coming together. And, maybe I'm a silver lining person, but I just know that was God's way of protecting us in that time. And so it doesn't make it easier, but maybe it did in a way, that blow came over a week, and we were able to just be wrapped in family's arms. And so that is when everything changed, so we lost Shawn that night, and I know he was with Jesus in an instant.
Wow.
And yeah, it's still hard. Still, obviously, like, it never is easy to talk about or share, and it hurts, but I'm sitting here today because there has been so much redemption and beauty in the story, and God from that first moment was present, like tangibly present, like I'd never experienced. And I just know that his peace was in our house from that first moment and has never left. And so,
man,
yeah, that.
Wow, Kelli, I mean, I don't really know what to say. I'm so sorry. And, I can tell that, like you said, it's even hard to share the details of those moments of hearing this news and sitting and waiting, for 5 days until official word came. And yet all the while still knowing that this is probably the case, that he is gone. And I'm struck, though, by what you said. I mean, you said that you're a silver lining kind of person, but looking back on it, you can see the evidence of God's grace in those 5 days. And the reason that strikes me is because we talk often about how God shows up in those darkest moments, And I've had conversations with people who would say, I don't know. On one hand, I've had conversations with people who say, oh my gosh, it was so real and so palpable. It's peace that passes all understanding, and I'm hearing that from you.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I hear some people say, where is he in all of this?
Right.
And I wonder, Psalm 23 tells us that surely goodness and mercy will follow us all the days of our life. But what I often say is you don't know that it's following you until you look back, right? You can't see something following you until you look behind you, and you're looking back and you're going, no, it was there. Like here's why these 5 days were so important when you look at it from God's perspective. But how do you, if you were to try to figure out how do you have that perspective as opposed to the alternate perspective? What's kind of informed that for you,
That, like you said, I've seen both. I've seen people react in both ways. And sometimes I just think, why? Why didn't I dissolve in anger? Why didn't I drive to the base? And why didn't I lash out? Because I just remember from the first moment kind of knowing and being, maybe it's just the numbness of shock, but I remember when I couldn't reach anyone on the phone, I didn't have answers, but I just felt like I was waiting for someone to come, sitting on my couch and picking up my Bible. It was sitting there on the coffee table, and I don't remember if I read it or not, or just opened it and stared. I don't remember. I just remember holding it and just thinking, everything is changing. God is not.
Wow.
God is not. And, it's incredible to me. It's grace, because I could have easily not, I don't know. I feel like it just was the Spirit in our home protecting me, protecting our kids, and very clearly saying, I'm here in this. And I believed it. And that is grace, nothing I have done. And I just continued to choose it. I think, we have that choice, and I continue to choose peace and joy and goodness, to see the goodness. And I think a lot of that is just the people I was surrounded with. My pastor was, one of the first ones in the door, and good friends from church, and just praying people. We had, I can't even imagine how many people were praying because of social media. And I know that made a difference in just our countenance and what we felt. And, there's a verse in Job where he says, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. And I just felt that, still feel that. This is something we as a believing family knew. God is here for us. God will take care of us no matter what comes, right? You say these things. And then you have a moment where you have to really believe it and live it. And by his grace, we did. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, and what I'm hearing you say, it's 100% his grace and 100% your willingness to open your heart up to that grace and receive that invitation of grace, right? Like there's this kind of like tension and almost two diametrically opposed concepts that seem to be at war with each other. If you think about it cerebrally, when you go, well, what gave you that peace? Right. Well, God's grace gave me that peace, right? God's presence gave me that peace. 100%. Absolutely. That's true. And yet there's so many people who stifle that or stymie that or block their hearts from experiencing that because they're not willing to open up their hearts for that grace and that peace.
Right.
And they're choosing to look at it from a different perspective. And so there's this, again, it's like, is it our choice to do that in those moments? Is it God's just like, irresistible grace in that moment? What is it? It's like, yes, I feel like it has to be kind of a marrying of those two things. And that's why it's so important that maybe even prior to this moment, the work that the soil of your heart, the soil work that you did with your heart, right? It leads to these moments right here that it's like, boom, this is a critical juncture where you can either choose to see God's goodness in it or God's presence in it, at least if you can't see the goodness yet.
Right. I think, it's those times when lessons you've learned, sermons you've heard, Bible studies you've done, all the hard work you've done, you have to live it out in those moments. Yeah. And maybe it's just been kind of theoretical before my ears had heard of you, but now suddenly you have to go, okay, do I really believe what I believe? And it's funny, one of my best friends came out, Sarah, and she had her phone and it had a phone case on it. And this was probably several days later, and it said, choose joy. And I just remember sort of picking it up and going, oh, I really like your phone case. And she took it off and she put it on my phone. And I don't know how long I had that phone case, but it's interesting to me to think in that moment, it was just that little thing, but it was swirling in my head, and she saw it too. And we just kind of silently in that moment said, we're going to choose joy,
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Can you think back on maybe some other moments in some of the immediate aftermath of this that you experienced God showing up? Some of those other places you can point to and say, this was God right here.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, over and over in miraculous ways, starting with just provision of 12 families were affected, 12 Marines died. And we're on this tiny island, and we just watched the community come together. And there were, I'll never know how many people played a part, but homes were opened up, cars were provided, flights were made. There were pilots flying faster than usual to get across the ocean, and to see people just come together like that to take care of families. And personally for our family, I had so many friends come and they just showed up from literally everywhere, the mainland in Japan. And so to see that, and then we would have random Amazon deliveries of Kleenex and toilet paper, and then all the way up to the day of the squadron memorial. So I think that must have been maybe 10 days or so after the actual crash. It was pretty soon after. They had a memorial on the flight line, and, you can picture the helicopters and 10 white crosses, and I don't know how many hundreds, thousands of people, all out on the flight line. And as we're arriving, all my family had come except for my brother and his wife, because they were expecting a baby any day. Wow. And they were in Texas. And as I'm walking in to the hangar, I get a text from him, and he had just been born. And walking in, actually, another friend had texted me a verse, Habakkuk, yet I will praise you. The verse, yet I will praise you. And then 2 minutes later, I get a text saying little Warner Matthew had been born.
Wow.
And that's not an accident. That is not coincidence. God chose his birthday that day, and Nathan and Amanda changed his name. They had intended for his name to be a WM name, because my dad's name is actually WM. It doesn't stand for anything.
Oh, okay.
And so they were going to give him names, but starting with WM, and they could kind of give him the same nickname. And that day they decided his middle name would be Matthew, the same as Shawn's. And
wow.
And so there I'm walking in to this, devastating moment of loss, and there's new life. There's new life.
Wow.
And yet we will praise.
Yeah.
God, I am so emotional today. So some of these stories are not the stories I normally get to tell, know, and it's so good to remember these miracles. But yeah, I mean, God in those little ways, like names, here we are again talking about a name, but there just are no coincidences, and we chose to see those things, and we chose to celebrate and praise the good, the provision, the family, the community, and Shawn's life. It's honoring to him, and we get to talk about the legacy he left, even by changing his name. We are still Campbells, and there's just so much goodness all along the way, and there's so many more stories like that it blows me away.
Wow. I mean, what I can see in you, Kelli, is this. I think it's this critical thing that we all have to get to, and I think I'm beginning to see this thread in so many people's stories, that really move from a place of pain into purpose, that really start to see redemption in their life. And that is just this willingness to surrender to God's plan, even though it can be almost completely contrary to your plan.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's any other way to describe it, but it's just this, there's a beautiful freeing sense that you experience when you surrender. I can see it in your emotion, right? I can like hear it underneath the things that you're saying, where it's like, I it's that whole idea. I didn't want my, as Habakkuk talks about, though the stalls will be empty, and it talks about all these things that have gone wrong, these things that would be, contrary to our expectations of what a blessed life would look like. It's easy to praise God when we're experiencing that kind of blessing, but what about when we're not, when actually everything looks quite the opposite, though I will praise you. Yeah. And that requires a level of surrender that says, I did not see any of this coming, and I would not have welcomed this if you had asked me prior to.
Did not ask for this.
Though
it's kind of like when people look at you and say, you're so strong, I could never do that.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, well, I didn't exactly choose it. And I didn't exactly think I was up to this,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure you would have told other people the same thing if you were sitting on their, right? You would have said, oh, I couldn't imagine going through something like that. And you can't until you do. I still
feel that way. I hear your story and think, I can't imagine. I hear, we all have different hard in our lives. And, but surrender has been, just that word. I remember feeling that early on, just, I surrender. I have nothing to bring to this.
Yeah.
I have nothing to add to this, God. Only you can do this. And also early on knowing he goes before, just that phrase, I don't know when we started saying it. And I say we because I just feel like I was always had a friend or family just close to me saying he goes before. He was not surprised. He did not change. Everything I can see changed, but he did not. And he knew this was coming. Even with Shawn changing his name, even with establishing our family solidly on that foundation, that was part of him preparing us for that time. Because there we had our Campbell family wrapped around us, Wow. But that surrender to me has been a big deal because I've gone through, now the last 6 years, just sort of over and over surrendering, over and over saying yes to the unknown. Yeah. When you have to start over and everything is different.
Yep.
And I like, for instance, I just started grad school and I have no idea why. I do not know what I want to be when I grow up. But here I am because it's the next thing. It's the next step God placed before me and said, here, walk in this. And I said, okay.
Wow.
And then I will wait and see what he will do with that.
Yeah. There's a beautiful mystery in that, isn't there? There's again a freeing feeling. I mean, we can plan and strategize our life and think about all the next steps and stuff to accomplish this vision that we have for our life. But man, the more we wrap our hands around and clutch those plans that we have, it seems like the more God wants to untether us from those plans, and then two, it's just more miserable because we know life's going to go differently than what we plan or expect. It's not. So to walk in step with the Spirit, it's just so much more freeing. And so I affirm that in you, and I'm sure that's been a journey over the past 6 years because what I can probably infer in your story, and maybe you can unpack it or you can dispute it if this is not the case. But what I know about military loss, what you've experienced, is that typically there's there's already in loss in general, there's a cascade effect of losses that happen, right? You said it. Every widow or widower would probably testify, that's the day that everything changed in my life. There were so many other losses that ensued. But especially for military families, that's typically the case, over some matter of time. Thereafter, you can experience the loss of community, the loss of, the loss of sometimes your home, having to get uprooted and moved back because you were stationed somewhere. Did that happen for you guys? If so, what was, how did you deal with all of that and process through all of those secondary losses? Right.
Yeah. Just loss upon loss. Our first loss was Shawn, and then it was our home, and then our community and our homeschool. And our pet rabbits. I mean, you can just go on and on. We took fish back to the pet store,
Wow.
Because we were in Hawaii. We were thousands of miles across an ocean from family. I don't say home. We didn't have a home other than that. A lot of people in the military, maybe they have home that they go back to. My parents had moved to a new state, and my siblings are scattered around the country. And so you were left feeling adrift. The Marine Corps had always chosen my zip code for me. How do I just up and move? Kind of like when Shawn changed his name. How do you just pick a new name? I didn't know how to do that. And so we had a short conversation, actually not long before kind of that what if conversation. And it was in passing, just, I don't even remember why. I think there had been a tsunami warning that day, and we said, what would we do if, But that came back to me, and the answer had been, well, we'd go to Kansas. We'd stay with my parents. We'd be safe. We'd figure it out. And so I knew that was what I needed to do. I knew that was our safe place. Rent in Hawaii was astronomical. Yeah. So there was no reason to stay knowing we wouldn't be staying. And then the pieces just sort of fell into place for us to move very quickly. So it was actually just a month later that we packed up our home, put it in storage, didn't know when we'd see it again, and headed to Kansas. And so there I was living in my parents' basement with my four homeschooled children, totally unable to homeschool anymore. Everything changed. Wow. And I came to this community where I didn't know anyone. I didn't know if I was going to stay. I might go live near a sibling or a friend, a base. Where do you go? And so again, that's when God stepped in, and it was on a day when I prayed. My kids had not been in school since the Christmas break. It happened right then. And so here we were. It was March, and there was a day that I went and I took them to the library, and we got about 50 books because we were homeschoolers, and when in doubt, read a book. We just got a bunch of books, and I thought, well, at least we can read. But I just remember sitting there with those books and just kind of desperately praying in my heart, God, I don't know how to do this. And that day I got a phone call about a school in Kansas City, a little classical Christian school, which we had been classical Christian homeschoolers, and just lined up perfectly. And they heard our story through a friend of mine and said, we just want to give you a safe place. Same time, same day, this is a little expensive private school. And that same friend found Folds of Honor, which is the organization I work for now. And they provide scholarships for K through 12 children, Gold Star kids. And so right there, I said, God, I don't know what to do. And he said, here it is, walk in it. And my kids were enrolled the next week. And so, again, there's the domino effect. Okay, we have a school. That's all I know. But this is all we need at the moment. And then we found a home. And then we got, we made new friends and got involved. And he began to piece this whole new life together. Yeah.
Wow, man. Well, I mean, I know it's a complicated process to rebuild life, and it's even more complicated with kids, as many as you were, shepherding these little hearts, and they're all different ages, and they're handling this loss differently. They all have different personalities that inform how they're going to handle loss, and all the while you're trying to heal from it, cope with it yourself. Talk to me about that a little bit. What was that like for you? Are there any kind of like, I hesitate to say, you pick up any like nuggets of wisdom for all of us who are trying to figure that out too. Like, but what have you learned in that process, and how have you navigated helping them to navigate all of this?
Yeah. Gosh, I don't know. I have a lot of help.
Spoken like someone who's truly experienced this. I don't know. We're trying to figure it out. Pretty sure I did a lot of things wrong, or everything wrong. And thankfully, welcome to the club.
The people around me that kept us afloat, because I just, how it is. You're numb. You're in shock.
Yeah.
So many people stepped in. I don't know who was changing the 2-year-old's diapers. I have no idea. When they ate, I don't know. But just like with the school, stepping in and say, we want to help you, I couldn't be their teacher anymore. I needed to just be mom. And now they had teachers and mentors. And so I just all along the way, and there were times I know when I felt so strongly, I'm doing this wrong. I need to help them. We need a counselor. We need to all go somewhere and I have to fix it. We want to fix it, and you can't. And I've realized since just walking through it with each, like you said, they were all, my oldest was about to turn 12, becoming a man and losing his dad. And the youngest was 2. He won't remember. And so the differences are so vast. Yeah. And I have seen in the last 6 years, just walking through this, God has met each of them where they're at when they need it in different ways. It doesn't look the same for them all. When my daughter refused to see a counselor, we found horseback riding therapy, and that was life-changing. And when my son didn't want to talk to a stranger, we found a pastor that met with him regularly, a youth pastor, and it's just God knows what they need.
That's good. Wow.
And it's hard though to wait and figure out what that is and feel like you're doing it wrong. And how God are you going to fix this? I think I asked that a lot. Like really, really, there can't be an answer in this. Yeah. And then I would see his answer and more miracles, more amazing stories come out of that.
Wow. So what a great question. How are you going to fix this, God? That's the raw and real question, right? But it also is, I think that's a really important posture to go, all right, I'm at my wit's end, God. I don't know. I can't fix this. And it's like when we get to those places of acknowledging our weakness, that's where he's able to step in and be strong in those spaces. And then we don't even see him fixing it until after he's done the work to fix it. And you're like, wow, how did you do that? Hold on a second. He's like, I'm not going to give you a chance to put a framework around this or a formula, right?
I'm going to let you mess this up. I've got a plan. He's got a plan. I think that's the bottom line though. And it is, and that's not to sugarcoat it and say, oh, just, God, no, he'll fix it. He'll do whatever.
No,
that is a deep wrestling you have to do constantly, daily surrender, knowing he's gone before, knowing he knows what you don't. His picture is so much bigger than ours will ever be. And we just have to trust. And even to say that, you're like, it just still sounds crazy.
Yeah.
Is that really all there is?
It does. It sounds like overly simplistic. And it's like, well, it is overly simplistic, or it is simplistic to walk in as a disciple of Christ, right? We're just trusting. That's what we're doing. We're taking it one step at a time, following the pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night, following the voice of the Holy Spirit. Your word is a lamp to my feet, a light to my path, right? All of these things that show us in Scripture, this is how God moves us and stirs us and directs us. And it's so simple. It's just not easy.
It's not easy. It's, that light to my path. I think I've thought about that a lot, and you realize, nowhere does he say I'm a light for the whole path.
That's right.
You're not going to see 10 miles down the road. You're going to see that one next step. And there was so many times where I literally had one next step. Get out of bed, put them in school, get them to school, and one next step at a time, we've seen this whole new life come together,
Wow.
And we're still there. I'm still taking one next step that I have no idea where they're headed. Right. So,
Well, you would describe your life as good now. Sorry to put the pun in there, but
I love it.
I want to hear how this happened. Talk to me about God's hand in all of this.
Again, completely unexpected. Where do I start? We met online, which I said, that'll never be me. Online dating, what is that?
Everybody has a hesitation when they admit that. I'm like, guys, more people than not have admitted that, right?
Exactly. And I think that's what hit me, like, oh, it's 2020. Like that's what you do now, I guess, and I met people in my church and just thought, really? Yeah. And again, I think starting to my thinking shifting to dating and what's next. It's scary, and especially when you have children involved. And I know that, I hit a point where I was thinking, I was lonely. And I think it's dangerous if you're single and going into that to date, to want someone out of loneliness. Or to fill a need that's God's need to fill. And So I won't say I did everything right, but God protected me and brought me my good now. And he's a miracle. He's just amazing.
Wow.
He's the bravest man I know to step into this because, I'm sure there's others out there. I've talked to widows who just think, who's going to want this mess?
Right.
Who wants to walk into this?
Yeah.
And he carries a lot, but he just has been a miracle. And his sweet daughter is now we have 5 that just all fit together perfectly. And he's been such a joy for the kids. There's just never been that tension, or the kids have welcomed him, love him. And I don't know. So that was 2020 also. So we got engaged in February of 2020.
Okay.
And we planned a very small family wedding for April of 2020.
Yeah.
So you know what's coming.
It was small and
and even
intimate.
that small wedding was canceled. And
man.
The week of that first stay-at-home order, you remember the shutdown in March, we kind of looked at each other and went, would this be crazy? And called our pastor and thought he was going to be like, let's think this through. And instead he said, well, I have a crash wedding on Friday, so how about we do yours on Wednesday? And he's just all business. And we're like, it's Monday. And so we got married, within 2 days. We made the decision, had a little wedding in our living room with 10 people because you couldn't have more than 10. And everybody was on Zoom and nobody knew how to use Zoom. And then the world shut down. And here we were blending families during COVID. And it was the biggest blessing ever, I can tell you. Yeah. And so it's just been this crazy ride. But
I've recently discovered that, an ancient Jewish wedding customs and rituals, the married couple has a year where they are not obligated to communal, responsibilities. They don't have to work. They literally take an entire year to honeymoon, so to speak.
And
I'm like, man, I kind of wish that I had that with both of my marriages, right? I think that's really powerful. And you got to experience, in some ways, this. Everything's kind of forced to be shut down, and we're just gonna we're gonna try to make this thing blend very naturally and very relationally and very, because there's so many responsibilities and obligations and busyness that. And sometimes blending doesn't look like blending; it's like colliding, right?
Right.
And what a beautiful thing! Yeah,
It was such a gift to have that time, especially with teenagers who like to hide out in their rooms, and it's like as a family to have that much time to be intentional. And I got to see him at work, but here at home, and I don't know if I ever really would have understood his job had I not seen him at it, and vice versa, and just all the things you get to see when you're 24/7 with the whole family. Such a gift, and that's been a neat thing for us to share too. In fact, his company published a story in their company intranet that reached thousands of people, and we were able to say, we've had some hard stuff happen. We got married in COVID, didn't get to have a wedding. But man, God has been good, and this is our story, and just little things like that to be able to share and see His goodness. And I mean, once again, not our plan, but His was better. So
Well, in the widowhood community, and I know you're very involved with not only the organization you work with now, but also Never Alone Widows. And obviously there's some crossover with different people that we know in those, networks and stuff. Obviously the Brookers are or Brittany's very involved with Never Alone. I'm involved with Daniel over at Refuge Widowers, which is kind of we saw a space where there were a lot of men who had lost their wives that they didn't have community like what Never Alone and some other organizations offer. And when we have conversations with widows and widowers, everybody understands the tension that is, especially if they've started dating or if they have remarried, they understand the tension of holding these two things together with your previous marriage and this person that you built a life with and that you loved and love, and then this new marriage. And there's people often think that you are kind of severing yourself from the past by stepping into the future. And we hold it all in tension. Can you talk to me a little bit about that from your perspective? Right. Because, so Shawn passed away when? At what year?
January 2016.
2016.
2016.
So
and Mike
4
and I
years
got married
later,
2020.
right? You get remarried.
Yeah.
People have had all kinds of opinions about, my life, good, bad, and ugly, in terms of how fast or how long, or, and in the widowhood community, we're like, listen, I always tell people, like, don't let anybody else inform you on what your timeline is, right?
No. Yeah. Yeah.
But some could look at it and go,
you can't please everybody. Either it's too long, it's too short, it's not the right person. Like, Again,
it's only the Lord that can really inform that. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just kind of the nuance of the navigating that. You're still grieving the past. You're stepping into the future. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. What's been your experience with that?
Right. It's still something I don't know how to explain because I feel like I don't know how anyone can understand if they haven't lived it and felt that it is possible for your heart to expand and love this person wholeheartedly, fully, completely. Right. And to be able to say, I understand it in my heart when I say I wouldn't change a thing at this point.
Yeah.
To say that almost makes it sound like somebody's going to think I'm saying I'm glad this happened. No.
It diminishes something about your past.
Yeah, it does not. It does not. To say I see now God's plan was different than mine, and I accept that. But to know that I fully, completely still love Shawn, and I fully, completely love Mike. And how is that possible? I don't know. I don't know. How do we have multiple children and love them all? Right.
Yeah.
That is like the miracle of God's love. But it is really, it's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it.
Yeah.
And I think, and that is where some of the tension comes in. There are people that don't believe that's possible.
Yeah.
People will say things that hurt, that unintentionally, just, you have to walk in total trust in what God's doing and know that people won't always understand. But it's part of his redemptive story, and this, the beauty from the ashes. Mike is a part of that. And I always say this space between Kate and Donovan, they're almost 4 years apart. Avery fit right in there. Like it had been made for her. And, it was kind of, why are they spaced out? And, Donovan was a pleasant surprise. We didn't know if he was possible. And he came along a little later. And now I know, same with my boys being 10 years apart. My son, I remember at 9 years old, 7, 8, crying because he wanted a brother. And then he got a brother, and I'm thinking, but why do they have to be 10 years apart? Like, what, Lord, why can't they be best buddies? And then they lose their dad, and they have each other. And I realize Donovan has Tristan to look up to, and so many answers that we may or may never see down the road.
Yeah.
That was a rambling way of answering that question,
that's so good.
Yeah.
Well, you're just peering in and you're seeing God's hand still in the details of what you're experiencing. Are there some things you guys do intentionally, some things that you guys have learned, maybe even by default or by not doing it properly? Yeah, accidentally, in terms of like, maybe I'd ask this in two different ways, or at least looking into two different things in terms of you and Mike and your marriage and how to foster that sense of like still grieving, still holding on, still like holding sacred the past, but also like stepping into the new, as well as, so that, right? What are you doing with your marriage intentionally? And then what about with your kids as you guys are blending this entire family and the culture of your family? Things you're learning in that?
That's a good question. Probably a lot of just stumbling along and figuring it out as we go, for sure. I think that was one of the reasons, one of the ways I fell in love with Mike from the start, is that he didn't shy away from that. It didn't bother him that I was a widow or to talk about that. And watching him, meet the kids and get to know them and talk about their dad with them or point out things. I remember him taking my son, my oldest, hunting for the first time and telling him, he made a great shot and saying, "You got that from your dad." And that just, to me, is beautiful that he can be confident in his place in their life and know that he's not replacing their dad, but he has stepped into that role. And, you know, and there's tension in that with kids, and you have that conversation a lot. You know, you're not my dad, or you can't replace dad. And, you know, no, that's not what's happening, but there's this growing of our family. And I say, you know, our family now is part of Shawn's legacy. We never saw that coming, but, you know, we are who we are because of Shawn. You know, I am who I am after 15 years with Shawn. And Mike probably would not have fallen in love with the me 15 years ago. You know, like this is the time. And so it's just, there is always tension, and there is a need for counselors in that. And I think we'll be walking that out for a long time. The kids are still young. But just to have seen, you know, that's who Mike is, and that's why he's amazing, that he does carry that burden, and he loves them wholeheartely. He is dad to them, but we also talk about dad. And so, that's great. That's a tough one for all families, I think.
Yeah, and there's really not a formula for it. You know, it's just, it is the idea of blending, right? It's just, you're, I don't want to say you're reactionary by any means, but you're kind of taking what you're assessing as it comes, you know, and just trying to apply, you know, wisdom, experience, and help from other people, maybe mentors in your life, as well as God's word, into this crazy, weird ecosystem that you're trying to create into a culture of a family, right? It's just this, it's hard. It's not, there's nothing easy about it.
A lot of trust, a lot of prayer.
Yeah.
And a lot of knowing, you know, what we need to do as a family may not look like what people expect us to do.
Yeah,
you know,
that's good.
I think that's important too.
That's very important. It's a very good point, because a lot of people are going to peer into, and for whatever reason, people think that they have I don't know if it's a right or a sense of responsibility, or, you know, maybe some kind of combination thereof, to peer into your life when you've experienced loss and they've shown up for you in that loss. And then they now feel like they can formulate an opinion about what you should do, or they have an expectation of what you should do. And they may not mean it maliciously whatsoever, but it can creep into you beginning to just follow people's expectations as opposed to doing what God has called you to do as a family, you know? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, especially with such a close community. You know, I have such a close family and so many close friends, and you welcome that in, you know, in the beginning, especially when I just was literally just like letting everyone take care of us. And then you start to kind of get back on your own feet again and think, I need to really be intentional. And I'm thinking now, what do I want? Or what is God saying to me? I'm not just sort of riding the waves of this anymore. And that's when you have to kind of step back a little, I guess. And, you know, am I doing something because it's what people expect? Is it what someone else thinks? You know, people have a lot of ideas about what your story is going to look like. You know, they just imagine this fairy tale for you. And, but we can't know.
Yeah. There's so much to that, because healing, you're experiencing almost a redefining of your identity in Christ, right? I mean, speaking of names, that's quite the thread in your story, but that's what's happening when you have experienced loss, and you're now coming to terms with like the new you, this new you that God is trying to bring into, bring into existence. And sometimes, you know, people who were around you at first, they're very protective of you. And that protectiveness can very easily, without them knowing, without you knowing, become a possessiveness, you know? And it's important for both parties, I think, to recognize that and to kind of go, okay, if you're caring for someone who is lost, to go, hey, I'm going to care with no strings attached. And then I'm going to begin to back away as I begin to see this person step into the new life that they're supposed to step into. And that's very difficult. I wish like someone had told me that before experiencing this. And it's like the thing I feel like I want to tell everybody who's like, I want to gather everybody up in a group, you know, I know it's a weird visual, but like almost at a funeral, and go, all right, let me tell you how this is going to happen, guys. Like, this is what I want you to be aware of. Okay. Right now, I know this feels very weird to say this in this moment, but over the next several months and years, this is going to be, and there's just nobody telling people this kind of stuff, but it's the stuff we talk about when we get into these widower circles, these circles, we're like sitting at these retreats and we're like, man, this is the thing that I'm struggling with. I'm like, oh yeah, I've experienced that too. Why is everybody experiencing this right now?
Yeah. Okay. That's normal. Yeah. And I love it when people come to me and, maybe they've experienced a loss, or a good friend or family member of theirs has experienced a loss, and they come to me and say, how can I love them? What can I do for them? And, my answer is always just show up and just sit in it with them. 'Cause you can't fix it. And I'm a fixer. I get it. Even when I see things happening, I want to jump in and fix it. And then I have to go, no, you just sit in it with them. You sit in the fire and, I saw people do that for me.
Yeah.
It's been amazing. You just sit with them and you be there. My friend Christy, she shared the most beautiful quote early on, and it was, I need to find it. But basically just, those close friends are the ones that show up and stand where you can see them. And I think that's never alone. It's this ministry. It's let them know they're not alone in it. But also that it's okay for them to feel what they feel, to have the anger, to say the things, to ask God the questions. 'Cause this is not how it's supposed to be.
Right.
It's unfair, and it's okay. It's okay to state that truth. This is not what he intended. But just to be there in it with them and let them walk it out, knowing you're there, you know?
Wow. Yeah. So good. Kelli, I wish we could sit here and talk for another couple of hours. This has been an amazing conversation. I'm curious, as we kind of close, you get an opportunity to talk to a lot of widows and to minister to them, which is, I just love that you've taken what you've experienced, this pain, this heartache, and this grief, and you're turning it around into something that's really purposeful, that has this incredible mission that's much bigger than yourself, right? And I think that that's so critical to us continuing to walk in healing and wholeness, is to really apply ourselves to that kind of a mission. But, there's going to be a lot of people who are listening to this conversation, and personally, they're in the throes of it right now. And they've just experienced loss. They've just gotten that phone call. They've just, or maybe it's not loss. Maybe it's just some kind of hardship that they're experiencing. I wonder what you would say to them if you were having coffee with them right now, if you were sitting down across the table from them. What would you, how would you, I know obviously you would just sit and listen, right? Of course, right? Because that's what you just said, is like, just sit and listen.
Yeah,
but if you had the moment to, if you had the moment to really just impart something to them, what would you say?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I don't know how I could, how do you boil it down and not overwhelm them? Because I would just be like, there's 6 years of miracles, Right. Because I can remember, too, being in that place where it's so hard and you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. You don't see the light at all. And you just feel like, my life is awful. It's not supposed to be like this. It's unfair. And God, I know you're here, but I don't see the way out. And I remember being there and even seeing people 10 years down the road who are good now. They've seen kind of the other side. They have this redemptive story, and I don't yet. And I'm a little bit jealous. I'm a little bit angry. I'm kind of wondering, maybe that's going to be their story, but not mine. And I think I would just tell people, no, that's going to be your story. Everybody, it's going to be different. There is no formula. There is no 12-step process. I don't care what people say. It's different for everybody, but he goes before for every single one of us. And you will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, My same, friend Christy, I've talked about her a lot. She's the one that repeated those words to me over and over. And prayed them over me and believed them for me when I couldn't. Yeah. And now I can look back and say, yeah. And so, I think it would be, I get that you feel awful in this moment, and I get that you can't see it. And so I'm just going to continue to trust in it for you until you do.
Wow.
That's what people need,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, Kelli, is there a way that we can connect further with you? If people are listening to this, they're like, man, I would love to just follow what she's doing, or follow her life, or connect with her. How can we do that?
Yeah, I'm not like a big blogger or anything like that. I'm on social media, on Instagram and Facebook, and I love connecting with people one-to-one. It's not weird for me if a stranger reaches out and says, my friend just lost her husband. Will you talk to her? I love that, So yeah, Kelli, I think I'm Kelli Campbell-Goodnow on Facebook, Kelli M. Campbell on Instagram. I'm here, and like you said, Never Alone Widows is just growing and growing. And it's incredible to see the stories coming out of that, and the community, and the need, the unmet need that's out there for that community is incredible. And so I will never shy away from the chance to talk to somebody and make sure they know they're not alone.
Yeah. That's so good. Well, I definitely, if you are a widow, or someone who is a widow, and you're watching this on YouTube, or you're listening to this, I want to encourage you to get connected with Never Alone Widows. If you know someone who's a widower, I want to encourage you to get connected with Refuge Widower Retreats. There's not a whole lot of great resources out there or community gatherings for widowers. There are definitely more for widows, but I believe so wholeheartedly in the ones that we, endorse, both Never Alone Widow Retreats, as well as Songs in the Night. That's led by our very own Brooke Talley as one of our coaches. But I just want to encourage you guys, because I know that there's going to be a lot of, probably an influx of widows and widowers listening to this conversation, Kelli, because they maybe followed our curated pathways and they see this conversation, and we really want to get you in community, right? That's the goal, is to find other people who are walking through this that's similar, and then you can derive hope and encouragement from them, just like you have as you're listening to this conversation with Kelli. And so, Kelli, thanks so much for being generous with your time and
thank you,
sharing your story with us. And I see an incredible, I don't know if you're a writer, I don't know if you have a desire to, but I see an incredible book right here with this. And I see that because I love writing. I love seeing stories, but the whole good now and the name threads, it's got to happen. It's got to happen.
I mean, that story, I feel like, I've had a lot of people suggest that, and I have done some writing in the past, and I love to write, and I love storytelling, and, I don't know when it'll happen. God keeps telling the story for me. He keeps opening doors like this, and I'll just keep doing that until something happens on paper. I guess we'll see.
I love it.
He writes good stories for all of us.
That's right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
It's been awesome. It's been so great.
Thank you so much.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.